Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. While everyone is still coming in, I would like to remind you to use the Q&A function to ask any questions directed to our special guest today, Ms. Alicia Bárcena. You can also upvote any questions that you like, and we will try to answer those first. During the Q&A, you will get a chance to ask your questions yourself directly to our guest speaker, so I will be unmuting you. That's all for housekeeping today, so sit back and enjoy the session. On to you, Diego.
Thank you, Lamis. Welcome, everyone. I'm Diego Sánchez Ancochea, head of the Oxford Department of International Development. And it's actually a pleasure to welcome you all to the second of our lectures on climate change and the challenges of development. It's not, as I always say in these cases, a pleasure to be with you in a screen. I would much rather see you in our building in 3 Mansfield Road, but this is the world we live in. We are actually trying to do much more on climate change, much of which Laura Rival, Professor Laura Rival will explain in a second, including we just started a joint course in the MPhil in Development Studies on climate issues, but we also, with the leadership of Laura Rival, decided to launch this series. I will not say a lot about it because I want the chair to describe, only to say how, for me personally, as someone that works on Latin America and works with the structuralist idea, is such a pleasure to have you, Alicia, with us. Alicia Bárcena has led now one of the most important institutions, in my view, of the UN system for 13 years. And has actually helped to renew completely the thought and to put the emphasis in some of the key issues, including inequality and climate change. I will not say any more about her distinguished career because Laura will describe it in a second, but wanted to very much tell you how much of a pleasure this is and how much I hope it's to be continued to have you in Oxford. So with nothing else to say, let me pass to Laura, who would chair the session and who has led this initiative from the very beginning.
Thank you very much, Diego. It would not have happened without you, so you're really part of the project as well. For those new to our special series, let me remind you that you can find all the information on Audit's website, and Lamis will send you the link, where there is a dedicated page to the series recordings and side events. The fundamental questions raised by the impact that the combined climate and biodiversity crises are having and will continue to have on the burning issues of development require collective reflection. Those familiar with our department will know that we have over the years brought together a critical approach to the analysis of development, change, and structural transformation. But how can we at Audit now use our world-known approaches to the challenges of development to address the planetary threat posed by climate change and the cost of environmental degradation? The ecological crisis may call not only for a new understanding of development, as well as the introduction of new tools for measuring material progress, but also for a reconceptualization of the purpose of development. Should these include a complete rethink of key concepts such as economic growth, productivity, value creation, or profitability? Professor Arun Agrawal was our first speaker. A professor of environment and development in the School of Natural Resources and the Environment at the University of Michigan, he is also chief editor of World Development, the leading multidisciplinary journal devoted to the study and promotion of development everywhere in the world. To stretch our collective knowledge base outside the comfortable boxes in which we currently excel, Audit leading on human development and welfare issues, Arun's group leading on environmental conservation and institutional change, Arun offered to talk about the design challenges and impact potentials of using social assistance as a tool for climate adaptation. His lecture emphasized the need to think of climate change and development as intrinsically linked. He advocated for a more holistic approach to social welfare and argued that social assistance programs must advance absorptive, adaptive, and transformative climate resilience in order to achieve long-term sustainability goals. We could not think of a better speaker than Alicia Bárcena to follow on from the interesting questions and difficulties thrown our way by Arun Agrawal. Social assistance programs, or for that matter, any other sustainable development policy, dreamed, refined, and experimented upon within academic circles, only gain force if they are taken seriously by policymakers. Only people with direct experience of policy can answer the question, what makes a policy intervention a realistic, effective intervention? Alicia has had a rich academic career combining biology, environmental studies, public administration and economics, which has earned her several honorary degrees from the University of Oslo, the University of Urbana, and her alma mater, UNAM, in 2 years ago in 2019. Moreover, from very early on in her career, she has combined government office and civil society leadership. She coordinated the official publications of the Mexican government from 1982 to 1989 and was Undersecretary for Ecology in the Federal Cabinet from 1982 to 1986, as well as Director of Mexico's National Institute for Fisheries, while Director of the Southeast Regional Center of the National Institute for Research in Biological Resources in the state of Yucatan. Alicia worked closely with Mayan communities, initiating numerous collaborative research projects in botany, ethnobotany, and ecology. Then, as part of international efforts towards the drafting of the Earth Charter in the aftermath of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, Alicia co-founded the Earth Council, Consejo de la Tierra, in Costa Rica, which she co-directed until 1995. Her interest in indigenous knowledge systems or in the Earth Summit never went abated. She was a board member of IIED, for example, and of CIGIA Council that oversees the International Potato Centers in Peru. Alicia's distinguished career at the United Nations includes many different leadership roles in both UNEP and UNDP. In 2006, she became acting chef de cabinet at the UN headquarters in New York in the executive office of the Secretary General, who was Kofi Annan at the time. A year later, Ban Ki-moon appointed her as UN Undersecretary General for Management. Before assuming office as the Executive Secretary of ECLAC almost 13 years ago, Alicia had held various posts in the organization, including Director of the Environment and Human Settlements Division and Deputy Executive Secretary. When we first designed the lecture series, Diego and I had envisaged that Alicia would be speaking at the Sheldonian Theatre, Oxford's Noblesse Oblige, of course. The pandemic has forced us in a virtual world where Alicia cannot hear the applauses or see the smiling faces floating above the benched rows and balconies of the Sheldonian. We will nevertheless create a memorable digital record to be revisited and shared. Thank you, Alicia, for taking the time to be with us tonight. And thank you for sharing with us your thoughts on the climate emergency in Latin America, threats and opportunities for sustainable development. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for this very generous presentation. Unexpectedly, even I have forgotten many of the things I've done in life, and it reveals my age, which is also a problem. But anyway, let me thank most especially Diego Sanchez Acochea. Thank you so much, Diego, for this invitation. I really feel very honored and very happy to participate in this international conference organized by Oxford Department of International Development. So it's a privilege for me to be here with you. And without further ado, thank you, Laura, and thank you to Jamil as well. And let me quickly go into the presentation and share with you the presentation. Just let me know if you are seeing it, and if you are, please tell me. Can you see it? Great, perfect. So let me then start immediately. In ECLAC, we have, as you very well described, dear Laura, my life started as an environmentalist, and my life today is as an economist. So I think it's a good mix to address the issues that we are confronting today, which we didn't expect it, that we were going to be so hardly hit by these pandemics today, and of course by the climate emergency. So let me tell you and try to build up a narrative around these two crises. First of all, I want to share with you 5 messages. The first one is that health and climate change are the result of an unsustainable development pattern. We have to be very clear about this. Both are crises that are a result of I would say, of a development model that is not working. Secondly, for both crises, international negotiations, financial cooperation, and national climate policy, as well as health policy, are the way forward. We do need solidarity. We need to rescue the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Thirdly, I want to address the problems that Latin America and the Caribbean are confronting. This is a region that is highly vulnerable, despite the small contribution we really have in terms of global emissions. Fourthly, I would like to quickly run you through a proposal in ECLAC that we have done of a 3-gap model, where we are putting at the center climate action, but of course, equality. Equality is like the bottom line of this region, because inequality defines Latin America and the Caribbean. So whatever we do, we have to focus very clearly, of course, on environment, no question, but also on jobs, because we do believe that jobs are the key, the master key for confronting inequality, decent jobs, of course, and of course, how to boost investment, which is something that this region requires. Fifthly, how to connect the emergency with the transformative recovery, which is what I think everybody is confronting right now. The short term and the middle term start the same day. So whatever we do in the emergency, we also need to think through what this will represent in the future. So message 1, the 2 are a result of an unsustainable pattern. And we believe that it's a model that is associated with a very low grade and a falling rate of production and trade growth. It is like a recessionary bias, and the decoupling of the real economy with the financial system. I think this is something that we have to bear in mind structurally. Secondly, it's very much linked to great inequality. And in our region, the predominance of the elites, what we are calling the culture of privilege, that culture that obviously gives the best options to the richer part of the equation. And of course, it's based on large externalities, because this model is associated, in the case of Latin America and particularly South America, to extractive industries, to reprimarization of the economies, and of course, with emissions, with fossil fuels. And we have exceeded the global environmental thresholds. We know this. And there are many systemic vulnerabilities that COVID-19 has magnified. And we also see that the world is under a multilateralism that is in crisis, that we hope this will be better off with the new US government. But still, we believe that there are still a lot of confrontations in the world that are not favorable to a multilateralism that we need right now. The growing inequality in the world, not only in this region, of course, climate change. The other question is migration and demographic change, of course, the COVID-19. And then the world is being reorganized in a new economic geography, actually, where we are seeing the nearshoring, the reshoring of many companies out of China, for example. And this is configuring a very new economic geography in the whole world. Of course, the technological and digital revolution. And as I said before, our shared resources are at risk. I'm not going to address every single thing, because what I want to say is that the COVID crisis is foreshadowing the impact of the climate emergency in the reality. Of course, we talk about climate change, no question about it, but both of them should be considered as public bads because they are arising from the abuse of nature. Inaction will have irreversible costs, and they show the strategic value of public goods. You know, a pandemic is already a public bad, and the climate insecurity is a public bad as well, as much as war or financial instability. And all of these public bads require collective, simultaneous action and international cooperation. And of course, what we have seen right now is that the state is coming back to the stage and it has an essential role to play. But of course, the other thing that is coming back is science. Science has to be again at the front space, and it is actually with the pandemics. Everybody's going back to science, but we have to do the same with climate change. And of course, the COVID crisis is a trade-off with economic activity. We know that, and we have seen this. There is a false dilemma between health and economy, but that's in certain way going on. But the climate crisis can be an opportunity to create synergies with economic activity. And this is what I would like to suggest in this presentation. The problem is, as I see it, is that the COVID-19 has developed a sense of urgency and political will. I mean, regardless of the problems we are facing all over the world, but in certain way, everybody has a sense of urgency and political will. By contrast, the sense of urgency and political will are still lacking in relation to the climate crisis. So that's my message one. Message two, we need international negotiations, and of course, national climate policies are key. But let me tell you, of course, the Paris Agreement, we have to bring that to the forefront, and we are very happy that the US is coming back. But what is the Paris Agreement? And we see it from our perspective of a peripheric region, let's put it that way. Yes, it defined the planet's carrying capacity for carbon, but it also created voluntary budgets, carbon budgets, that should be more ambitious. We know that, and that's why Glasgow in the COP26 should call for more ambitions on the NDCs. It's also an opportunity between activities, I mean, to look at activities that have an opportunity cost and that we should look at them carefully. But, this is the great but, and that is Paris Agreement is a setback in the common but differentiated responsibilities principle that was agreed upon in Rio 92. And I think it is heightening the tensions between the center and the periphery, calling back the school of Raúl Prebisch. But indeed, we think that Paris Agreement does not recognize the common but differentiated responsibilities sufficiently. And the carbon budget that is remaining in the world might not be enough for the peripheral countries to meet their development needs. So there is a global tension over the carbon budget. The more the center grows, the more the developed countries grow, the less space will be available for the growth of the periphery. If we consider the carbon budget as a global budget, which it is. So we have to all the world has to make a faster technical progress to move towards less polluting products, of course, and give more space for growth for both the center and the periphery, but definitely for the periphery. So, and we need a movement of these innovations quickly. The transfer of innovations needs to go further and faster from the center to the periphery. And therefore we need in certain way, certain rules and property rights that should be looked into to see if this technology can come faster and cheaper to the periphery, to the developing countries. And of course, we have to move, no question about it, in consumption and production patterns to less intensive in carbon, and of course, in natural resources, and increase space for balanced growth. Because the global carbon budget, and this is the problem, if the world wants to get to less than 2 centigrades above pre-industrial levels, the carbon budget that is remaining is 1,070 gigatons of CO2. If we want to go, if our threshold is 1.5 centigrades, above pre-industrial levels, then the budget that is remaining is 320 gigatons. Today, currently, the world is emitting 50 gigatons per year. So if this flow continues, then it will run out in 2 decades, and for 1.5 in less than 1 decade. So if we don't get this, the temperature will rise. If we don't do anything, by the end of the century, the temperature will rise to 4 degrees. So message 3. So that's why international negotiations are so important, and there has to be a balance. And the message 3 is that our region is highly vulnerable despite the small contribution to global emissions. And we are confronting a twofold inequality. First of all, because Latin America and the Caribbean contributes 8.3% of global emissions. And yet, look at the rest of the world. I mean, this is only in a nutshell, let's say, but we are a region that doesn't contribute that much, though we are very highly vulnerable, particularly Central America and the Caribbean. Global emissions were 50 global gigatons, as we said before. You remember in the previous here, we know that the world is emitting 50 gigatons, but our region out of these 50 is only emitting 4.2. So we see this as a very big asymmetry, and therefore for our region, adaptation is inevitable. It's inevitable and has to be put at the very forefront of the international agenda. Of course, we are very conscious that our region has a structure of emissions that we have to look into. 45% come from the energy sector, 23 from agriculture and livestock, which is very, very high, and 19% from land use change. But we are also confronting this very high fragility vis-a-vis natural disasters, and we have ECLAC has been measuring these natural disasters since 1970, and we have recorded around 2,300, and with the two recent ones, probably 2,312 disasters. And these have caused great losses in terms of people, in terms of costs. And also, we see that the estimated costs with the main physical impacts of 2.5 centigrade temperature range between 1 and 5% of the region's GDP. That is, if we continue in this trend, the cost to GDP will be around 1 to 5% of the region's GDP, depending on which country we're talking about. That's a range. And of course, the highly sensitive sectors include agriculture. Agriculture is the most affected sector in our region. And of course, the water challenge. The water scarcity will increase droughts and the high effects in the coastal areas. I'm going to show you a little bit. In the Caribbean, for example, just as an example, the proportion of population living below 5 meters. This is what I'm trying to show here. You can see people living in the coastline, Jamaica, 200 and living, the majority of people living in 207 kilometers, and here is the population that lives below 5 meters. And the Caribbean really is so close to the sea that they are very vulnerable precisely to hydrometeorological events. We can see, and many people think that the high external debt, financial external debt of the Caribbean is because they didn't behave properly in terms of macroeconomics, but actually it is also very much related to the extreme hydrometeorological events, because they prevail and they are hitting these countries tremendously. Just last year, Dominica was totally destroyed, and Antigua and Barbuda was absolutely hit last year also by Irma as hurricanes, and this year, of course, it was the Central American ones that were very highly hit. What are we suggesting here is that there has to be a debt relief or a debt swap for resilience in the Caribbean, definitively. We are calling for a debt relief of 12% of the total debt of the Caribbean. The total debt is approximately $57 billion. We are calling for 12%, which will be around 7 billion, to create a Caribbean resilience fund that could be capable of addressing the adaptation needs. And we have put forward a proposal for a debt swap for resilience, asking for creditors to acquire multilateral and bilateral debt at discount rates, to repurchase and debt swap mechanisms, to put the savings into this resilience fund. And of course, to really, we have to address this problem as soon as possible, because they are, look at Barbados has 125% of GDP in external debt. And I think it has grown even last year, even more. And the Caribbean was most affected because, for example, Barbados, the other day with Mia Motley, we were talking about tourism, and tourism has been reduced in the Caribbean 90%. So they are losing their capabilities to recover. LAC challenges. What are the challenges of adaptation? As I said before, of course, agriculture is the most sensitive sector. Yields, crop cycles will change. The vulnerability of power generation systems, hydroelectric plants are going to suffer, and cities, no question about it. And the water challenge. We believe that water challenges and droughts will be one of the most important things. The loss of biodiversity is totally underestimated, and we are losing it very fast. And of course, the Amazonian forest is an example in case. The coastal areas, as I said before. Message 3, what can we do? And this is the model that CEPAL, ECLAC, we are suggesting, where we are putting climate action and strategic sectors at the center to reduce emissions, to create jobs, and to boost investment. We know that we have 3 structural crises in the world: the economic, the social, and the environmental. And the problem is that we are discussing the 3 in silos. How do we bring the 3 together? This is what we need to do, actually, because even with the pandemics, we are in certain way deepening this silo approach to the economic, to the social, to the environmental. So we definitely need to combine policies and instruments in this economic recovery and change, as I said before, the development pattern. So what we did is a model that I invite all the students to look into. We prepare a document that is called Constructing, Building a New Future. And we are dealing with 3 dimensions, and we are calculating what is the 3 growth rates that this region can achieve due to its constraints. For example, in the case of the economic, what is the rate compatible with the external equilibrium? That is, with that, as you know, this is a region that has a commercial deficit that is very, very hard. And we are in this balance of payments, I would say, dilemmas every time. So what is the rate of growth that we could achieve without going into more debt or more inflation rates? Secondly, what is the rate of environmental growth, rate of growth that is compatible with the planetary balances and the environment? That is, if we really want to stay in the threshold of the Paris Agreement, 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, how much this region could grow? And it's very little, you will see. And of course, the social. What is the rate of growth that we need to achieve equality? That is, to combat poverty, because poverty today in this region is more or less 208 million people are in poverty. Of those, 98 are in extreme poverty. Can we address this? So how do we do this model? And very quickly, we have done a model closing the 3 gaps and looking at which is the growth rate and the minimum growth rate that this region will need to grow with equality, and that is 4%. This region needs to grow 4%, but it needs to grow with redistribution. And the model we are suggesting is that the 1% richer should transfer 1.5% of GDP every year to the 1% poorer. And that has to be done, obviously, through a fiscal compact or even to transference that has to be done. 1.5% of the 1% richer to the 1% poorer. With that redistribution pattern, we could be able to eliminate extreme poverty in the next 12 years. What is the growth limit with the external equilibrium. As I said before, in the case of South America is 1.4. South America cannot grow more than 1.4 without engaging themselves into an inflation, let's say, problem, or into an external debt problem. And Central America and Mexico 2.6. So they have to deal with these external constraints with structural changes, and that is honestly with import substitution of some key parts and elements. And the growth limit in terms of the Paris Agreement, if we really want to comply with the Paris Agreement, we can only grow 1.2% unless we decarbonize. If we decarbonize, then and this is why we are trying to set a convergence of these growth rates that are limited in the case of the environmental limits, or in the case of the external equilibrium, towards 4%. And for all of these, what we need is technical progress. The model is very detailed. I hope you will find it interesting to look into the proposals we have. And what we are asking for also in this model is how do we move towards what we are calling a big environmental push. And here I'm calling on Rostein Rodan. You may remember him. He was the one who spoke about the big push when we had those problems in the problems we had before, in the great crisis we had in the world before. So we are adding into that the big environmental push. And for that, we are calling for these sectors that we feel could have a strategic role in closing these three gaps, because they promote technical change, generate employment, and reduce the external constraint if we do it properly. First of all, transformation of the energy matrix towards renewable energies. Secondly, sustainable mobility in urban spaces, of course, electromobility practically. Digital revolution, total inclusion of the population into digital economy, but also moving towards better digital capabilities in the region. The fourth is the healthcare manufacturing industry. We believe this region could go and build a better capacities in terms of pharmaceutical industries. Bioeconomy, solutions based on nature. I think this is something that this region needs to move into. The circular economy, and here we are working closely with Europe, and sustainable tourism. This is urgent for the region. And all of this, of course, is to comply with Agenda 2030. We identified these 7 sectors, and we calculated sector by sector what can happen. We did some modeling. So if we want to decarbonize the energy matrix, costs less than maintaining it, for example. So if we move today from the current situation we have, which is 12.7% of non-conventional renewable energies, we have 12.7% right now. The countries would like to move to 24.6, but if we move to renewables without integration, that is every country on its own, and we move to 41%, or we do it with integration, as Central America is trying to do, then all of these will cost 1.3% of GDP every year between 2020 and 2032. And it will reduce 31.5% of emissions, of CO2 emissions. And also it will create 7 million jobs. We did all the modeling. So we have 3 benefits. We can have 30% fewer emissions, 77 million jobs, and of course, we could go into, I would say, a much better situation. Electromobility is another opportunity. We have calculated that, and we did it for the case of Mexico City, and we are working for each of the cities of the region. It is even cheaper if we convert diesel buses into electric. It costs half as much as buying new buses. So this is something that we want to put in front of the decision makers, because we really believe that they should move extensive systems of public transport into electric buses, and to improve the capabilities of these. And also the region has abundant lithium and copper, and And we have resources for wind and solar and green hydrogen, by the way. Investing, the third proposal we have put forward is investing 1% of GDP per year to be able to achieve total inclusion of the households of this region in internet. We have 40 million households in this region, Latin America and the Caribbean, without internet connection. This is terrible because, and this is even more acute, I would say, in the rural households that are not connected. And the repercussions are terrible because 42% of those age under 25 and 54% of those age over 66 do not have connectivity. And this is having a tremendous impact in schooling. Almost 42% of children between 5 and 12 years have lost a total year of education. And what we're talking about is to provide a basic digital basket, which will cost 1% of GDP per year average. Of course, it will cost more in Bolivia and much less in Chile. In Chile will cost 0.3% of GDP, which is really something that the government could afford, and give and provide a laptop, a tablet, a smartphone, and a low-cost internet plan. And of course, if we move quicker to the digital technologies to include people and territories, we will be able to reduce global emissions by 15%, dematerialize, optimize resource management, conscious consumption. We will, on the other hand, of course, will have higher energy consumption and more hardware pollution. So we have to look at the two. But in any event, we believe it would be overall a good thing to do. And the other two examples is bioeconomy, which we are working very hard on this transition to agroecology and the development of value chains with crops that are native to the region, like cocoa, like maize, like potato, and how to move into a low emission agriculture with less pesticides including, and combine, of course, biotechnologies and move towards, as you said at the beginning, to the indigenous people's knowledge, that they have a lot of knowledge and we have to learn from them. And of course, circular economy, we have calculated that if we increase the recycling rate and the number of materials recycled, we can certainly give a strong push and create almost 450,000 jobs and boost the region's GDP by 0.35%. So we are looking very closely into the adaptation and nature-based solutions that can produce significant benefits. Of course, making resources management more resilient. For example, we were looking at protecting mangroves could diminish, for example, the risk of hurricanes, of loss and damages due to hurricanes, almost 30% if we preserve mangroves in the coastal areas, for example. And of course, agriculture, and of course, infrastructure that has to be more resilient, and early warning systems that we definitely need. So how do we improve the investment portfolios in very strategic sectors? No question, reforestation has to be one of them. Now, one of the things that I want to emphasize is that the international resources are very limited, and we are still lacking a lot of real political will and financial will to move resources towards adaptation. So, for example, the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is calling for moving adaptation finance from 20% that we have today to 50% at least, because mitigation is the one that has the financing, but not adaptation. Look at the difference between 17 and 77% in terms of adaptation and mitigation, and we definitely need adaptation in this region and in many others. And finally, my last message is, how do we connect the emergency with a transformative recovery? So first of all, I have to say, and this is very important because everybody's focusing on the emergency, and we have to move this emergency to a transformative recovery. So first of all, let's understand where we are in terms of this economic crisis. GDP in this region has really turned down, and we are confronting a lost decade. There is a number that is wrong here. It's not 9.1, but it's 7.7%. I'm sorry for that mistake. But we know that this year, 2021, we might grow 3.7%. But that's going to be a rebound, not really a real growth. And of course, poverty, as I said before, will be around 209 million, extreme poverty, 78 million. Exports are falling apart in this region and in all regions except China, of course. Unemployment is up to 10.7%, with women being the most affected. In all fronts, women have been the most affected. Informality in this region is 54%, and the small and medium-sized companies have closed. Up to 2.7 million companies have closed last year. And as I said before, 40 million households do not have internet connections. So we have made 8 very concrete proposals to link emergency with recovery. Number one, health come first. That's no question about it. And we need access, production, distribution. It's not the same to have the vaccines than to have the whole process of vaccination. We were talking about this at the beginning. And we believe, and I'm sorry to say this so bluntly here, that we need more solidarity from developed countries. Some developed countries even have twice their population's vaccines already available, and the developing countries have none, some of them. So we need solidarity. We need that the borders are not closed for vaccines or for health inputs. Secondly, to have an emergency basic income, at least for the whole year, which is equivalent to one poverty line, $120 a month. That is totally possible. Third, how do we protect the small and medium-sized companies and the micro enterprises? Because this is a crisis of supply and demand, so we have to do both. As I said before, the digital basket that we believe could be very important for these 40 million households. 5, I think this is something that we need to understand, that we will need fiscal and monetary expansionary policies that have to stay on, conventional and non-conventional. 6, we need international solidarity, as I said before, debt relief for the Caribbean, and we need debt service relief for the Central American countries. They cannot continue paying the very high debt services they are paying, and their fiscal space is going down the drain. And of course, as I said before, we have to set up recovery plans based on investment, employment, and environmental sustainability. Whatever governments are going to do to recover has to have these 2 elements, employment and sustainability. And of course, we need, as you were saying at the beginning, Laura, that we do need fiscal and political compacts with universal protection that is progressive and with redistribution. So we have developed fiscal policies that need to be taken internally to expand the fiscal space. The first thing that our countries have to do is to combat tax avoidance, which is up to 6.1% of GDP, to review the tax expenditures, which is 3.7% of GDP. These 2 is what we call the culture of privileges, who is being benefited by this, to strengthen, of course, tax collection and move towards a more progressive taxing system, capital included and property, and the digital economy. And of course, we have to look into public expenditure to do it better. On the international front, I think we need the solidarity of the international community, particularly to this region, which is considered a middle-income region, in which we need the redistribution of liquidity, the emission of special drawing rights, at least up to $500 billion, that will give us space. In the case of Latin America, around 56 billion will come, and in the Caribbean, 2.5 billion. Relief of the external debt of the Caribbean, as I said before, and another way of redistributing liquidities with this phase initiative of Costa Rica, that is a fund to alleviate COVID-19 economics, with a funding of $516 billion, regardless of your income level. So this is what I wanted to share with you, colleagues, today, and that is that we believe that the pandemic has to be seen as an opportunity, both to reflect that the model is not sustainable, so we have to move into a big push for sustainability, aligned with the 2030 agenda, look into the welfare state. This is a must, at least in our region. We cannot confront another crisis with the fragmentation we have in terms of social security and health services, and that requires a new way, change the conversation between the market, the society, and to build resilience, and to restore politics with public participation. We have put in place the Escazú Agreement, which is a citizen, I would say, the first environmental treaty of this region, which protects, for example, the rights of the human, of the rights of those who are fighting for the environment. And of course, we need institutions and coalitions capable of formulating, implementing these policies globally, regionally, nationally, that can sustain these policies in time. Thank you so much. I think I hope I was fully clear and in time for the time I was allocated with. Thank you so very much, and I am at your disposal.